And businesses in South Africa have lost an estimated $15 billion in revenues as a result of ongoing Eurozone crisis and other local economic pressures. Alan Hilberg, who's the principal of Hilberg Associates, joins us now as we discuss what businesses should learn in a time of crisis. Alan, I know that Alec is very keen to speak to you. He referred to the Tylenol issue that took place back in 1987, Alec, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, looking at the current environment right now, we mentioned crises in the South African market, and I think the most recent one that comes to mind must be the Marikana shooting, where Lonman was rather apprehensive to comment, but later did come to the fore and negotiated with the media. But what are South African companies doing wrong with regard to handling media negotiations and discussions when it comes to a crisis situation?
It's hard to say what South African companies are doing wrong. I think what's more important is to say what are they doing right. Crisis management is first and foremost about business continuity, it's about protecting the brand, and it's about trust. So when you look at those three ingredients, you have to ask yourself, is your thinking, is your strategy, is your plan structured to really focus on those three ingredients?
Okay, Alan, we're going to give you a couple of tasks to do for us now, starting off with the construction industry. South Africa's construction industry, this is fact, colluded. They were found guilty by the Competition Commission. They paid a record fine of 1.5 billion rands. They are struggling to rehabilitate their reputation. It has to happen because we are on the brink of a massive infrastructure boom in this country. The government wants to spend 4 trillion rand, but it's a little cautious about doing it with a bunch of colluders. How would you handle that?
I think when you look at great companies, what do they have in common? Great companies, great brands, they all stand behind great values. Not knowing what the construction industry's values are, it's a great, one of my favorite questions is to always ask a client what's missing. And I think in this case, perhaps the people who made decisions didn't necessarily make those decisions based on their values. And if that was the case, then this is a wonderful time to reconnect with all the communities that require the trust in the construction industry because of the incredibly important role they play in South Africa. Somebody asked me the other day what was my impression of South Africa, and I said, it's like a masterpiece, but it's a work in progress, and all great pieces of work are works in progress. And I think from the perspective of the construction industry, it would be a wonderful time to step back and say, what are the values that we have that guide every decision we make? And perhaps the decisions that were made in the past were not made with the values that they have, or made by people who forgot what those values were. But it's a good starting point is asking, what are our values? And how do we communicate those values, live those values? How do we make decisions based on those values?
Well, thanks. You've just given the construction industry a couple of $1 million worth of insight there. Hopefully they listen to you. Alan, question number 2. In South Africa, we have a government that decided to go ahead with tolling of the roads, building new roads. I suppose construction's involved here as well. In Gauteng, which generates 40% plus of economic activity, it now wants the Gauteng drivers to pay a toll. The Gauteng citizens are refusing. They're refusing to get involved for a host of reasons. How do you handle a hot potato like this if you were in government's shoes?
I think what you're asking is, how do we reimagine the relationship? And I go back to that question, Alec, we asked right from the beginning, which is what's missing. And I think that if I was going to step in and help in this kind of situation, and interestingly, we are going to be opening an office in South Africa, but getting back to your point, the reality of it is that there's something in the relationship that has created this mistrust. And when you look at, I've worked on over 250 crises around the world, beginning with Tylenol through every perhaps major crisis of the late 20th and earliest 21st century, and they all have 3 ingredients. One is mistrust, one is disengagement, and one is flawed decision making. So you have to ask yourself which of those ingredients are in fact in play here relative to the conversations and the breakdown in the relationship and the breakdown of the understanding between the government and those the government is asking to pay that toll.
Alan, when it comes to the importance of public relations, many people think that it's what's the word that I'm looking for here, Alec? Maybe people who play with other people's minds or
propaganda.
Propaganda. There we go. That's one of them. But do you think public relations is taken importantly by corporates in South Africa, or does this often come to play when there's a crisis to handle?
It's a very good question. My feeling, my experience. I've been doing this for 35 years. And my experience is that you can go to the lumber yard and buy a piece of wood and write crisis management and paint crisis management on it and say you're in crisis management. This is a very, very, very professional profession. And it requires not the traditional public relations skills or tactics. It really represents a process that is built around, first and foremost, critical thinking. And it's the ability to see around the corner. It's the ability to see what no one else sees. And so I think the industry, and I know the Public Relations Society of South Africa is trying to do everything in its power to elevate the quality of the professional. And from the standpoint of South Africa's development and from the standpoint of South Africa's future, I think elevating the quality of the communications professional, because communications is not about press releases. Communications is really about getting people to listen. And that's important in every relationship. And if you get people to listen and you have the values and you have the experience that builds relationships of trust, that's the secret ingredients to succeeding in strategic communications. And I think that public relations, and just the name public relations, is probably a little, is perceived as being less substance. And in reality, when you practice crisis management at the level that at least my 35 years have been, you're respected for providing a real strategic value to your client, because it is about business continuity, it is about trust and about protecting the brand. It's not about a press release or a statement that'll get you through today till tomorrow.
Your entrance into the South African market, Alan, is long overdue. I'm sure you are seeing that there's rich opportunities. It's a wonderful field for crisis communication. But I've kept the last model or last example for you for last. This is the South African government, came to power in 1994. A year later, idealistically introduced labor legislation that was way out of step with what was going on in other parts of the world. A consequence of that, and that labor legislation has been voted 146th out of 146 countries by the World Economic Forum every year. The unemployment in South Africa is 26% and likely to continue rising. Those are the official figures, unofficially probably higher. When you guys in America had your Great Depression, unemployment peaked at 20%. So we now have a situation where a government has painted itself into the corner. It has labor legislation which it enacted when it was maybe less mature. It has a partner in government which is labor as part of its partner, which makes it rather difficult to change that. But it has a country where people are out of work. How do you start perhaps unraveling that in a way that you don't lose face?
It's a great question. I'm sure it's a question everybody wants the answer to, and I'm not sure there is a silver bullet here. I've been, over the 35 years, worked in so many difficult situations, and I've worked in a number of countries helping brand and market the country. And what I find is that when political parties forget that their existence is really to do what's in the best interest of the country. And every decision, I talked earlier about values, and I think it would be an interesting discussion for the different political parties to compare values. Because I find that when you can find a way to agree, as opposed to simply disagreeing because you want to you don't believe in what the other party stands for, and have a lot of experience in this, I find that you will always be a part. And I remember years ago involved in a labor, very, very sensitive labor negotiation in Italy, which is a very difficult country to negotiate with or in. We got to the last meeting, and it was a very, very interesting meeting. We had been battering heads for 6 months, and the managing director asked me what I thought he should do. And I said, you know, it's very simple. I said, take your shoe off. And I reached down and I took my shoe off and I held it and I said, give your shoe to your counterpart in the government, and give your shoe to the counterpart in labor. And let's exchange shoes, because until you wear those shoes, you really don't know what it feels like to be their position. And at the same time, he said, well, is that it? And I said, no. I said, do one more thing. Ask your counterparts to argue your position and you argue their position. All I'm trying to do is to suggest that there are many, many ways to create breakthrough. And if you're willing to listen, which is the basis of all communications, if you're willing to listen, you will be surprised that you can find what points that you can agree on. And I think as long as what you're discussing is in the best interest of the country, and as I said, you know, when I got here, someone asked me, someone else said, you know, this is my first trip to South Africa, what do you think? And I said, I'm emotionally overwhelmed, because I've never seen such a land of opportunity, and I really believe that. And I really believe that that'll be the future of South Africa.